Mike's live. You ready to roll? Good morning. Good morning. It's 8:10, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Apologize for the delay, but we wanted to be sensitive to the fact that some people are having a slightly harder time getting into the Capitol this morning. Welcome to the Senate Appropriations Committee meeting, March 27th, 2025. We have one bill on the agenda. It's House Bill 68. Before we get started, Senator Harbison, would you mind leading us in an invocation?
Yes, sir. Father God, thank you for allowing us to see another day. Bless us to be mindful of who is always in charge here in the Capitol as well as in the world. Thank you for your blessings. Give us safe travel going and coming. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. House Bill 68 has already been placed in your folders and it's on most of your desks. 238 pages that will lay out how the state will spend approximately $37 billion over the next 12 months. Taxpayer dollars that we ourselves sell nothing to create. They are created by our citizens and the economic activity that they create through jobs, creation of businesses and industries across our state. And we're blessed to be in this position to help reallocate some of those funds to areas that we hope are worthy of that effort. The budget process is not simple, it's not easy, and you know a lot of people are involved. I first need to say thank you to a few of them. I appreciate Director Dunn, Governor Kemp for their efforts this year, working with us even back into October as we started planning for this budget. They asked for agency requests back at that period of time, allowed us to have a little bit of insight into those, and then prepared their budget they brought forward to us. As you know, Chairman Hatchett in the House and Speaker Burns, who's the carrier of this bill, then picked those recommendations up, turned them into what you see here. It's House Bill 68. And Chairman Hatchett, there's few better to work with. I've had the blessing of working with two extremely talented, extremely kind, extremely caring House Chairman, Chairman Terry England, who we're all still thinking and praying for, and Chairman Matt Hatchett. And they make my job a lot easier. I'm glad for them. Glad to be able to work with them. The other group that's so extremely important to this task is our Senate Budget Office, headed by Brent Churchwell, Austin Trott, and the analysts who are sitting on the front row there. Without them, there is absolutely no way we would have been at this process now. This budget has been interesting for a variety of reasons that we'll probably talk about, and they have risen to the challenge once again in both the amended and the general budgets, and I am so thankful to work with a team that is so talented, so young, so experienced, so willing to give effort, whether it be at 1 a.m. in the morning or 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Thank you very much for everything you've done to help us get here today. You don't have to read too many headlines to see that the national outlook is sometimes scary. Markets are not what they have been in the past. You can usually predict when folks run to bonds, that means one thing. If they run to gold, it means something. If they run to stock market, it means a third thing potentially. But right now in the current economy, that's not necessarily, you can't watch what folks have done in the past and predict where we're going to be in the future. What I can tell you is that in 2019, we were cutting budgets. In 2020, when Chairman Jack Hill passed away, we were in a reduction mentality. We thought we were going to have to reduce funds. That changed though after COVID. We had to take 15% out of the budget, started there, ended up at 9.5% coming out, and then federal spending just changed the entire game. The federal sugar high though now 5 years later is clearly over, and we're back to the levels we were in 2019. That's not to say that that's the blame of any individual or any person or any entity. It's simply a realization that all COVID and COVID federal spending did was delay the inevitable for roughly 5 to 6 years. Where we stand now after we've seen double-digit increases in state revenues over the past few years is that we're not at that double-digit level anymore. In fact, you've seen, if we look at this year, we're about 1%, 1.8% at times revenue increase over the previous year. And that means things are leveling out. They're flattening. The sugar high is ending. We've also seen extreme cost increase, whether those costs be in labor, or those costs be in goods and inputs. And what we've also seen on a national level is an extreme desire by the federal government to get its fiscal house in order, a realignment of federal funds that's much needed, and I fully support, and it will impact us. In contrast, you have what we've done here in Georgia. For years, we've had a balanced budget. We've been in the low 50 states, we've been 40 or below in per capita spending and per capita taxation for quite a period of time. That's even after a surge at the local level that we've seen on taxation due to inflation and folks from the north deciding that the southern climate and the southern way of life has been something that they'd like to experience a little bit more. We've also been able to continue during this time to return billions to the taxpayers. While also continuing to return billions to the taxpayers, we've been able to lower the tax rate 0.6% at this point in time, which is roughly $2.4 billion that you will not see recognized in this budget that you would have had we not begun reducing the income tax several years ago. On top of that, you have a commitment to do that again this year. So I think we stand in great contrast budget-wise to where our friends at the federal level have been. We also need to realize, though, that the federal government didn't get there overnight. They borrowed a lot of money. They deficit spent many times. They funded some things that people might call half-baked ideas. But bigger than that, I think what they did is they refused to say no. And sometimes in the budget process, the hardest thing to do, but the most responsible thing to do, is you simply have to say no. They didn't push back on expenses, and that's why they ended up in the position that they were over many, many decades. We're not going to do that here at the state level. The Senate's budget that you see before you today prudently funds our priorities. It funds the needs of our state without issuing more debt, even the traditional debt that we've issued in the past. And we reject the urge to supplant federal funding from the COVID-era programs like ESSER and ARPA that are expiring this year. We also hold true to funding formulas, whether that means growth or that means reductions. And the Senate's budget eliminates some programs. It slows the growth of positions. It questions invoices that are brought to us. While they may be good ideas, sometimes we think that they lack some portion of explanation, and we may delay those for a period of time. The Senate's budget also prepares for expenses based on bills we've already passed in our assembly this year. And I think for the group that was meeting, subcommittee chairs that had to really comb through this and work in detail for hours and hours on end, I think that might have been their biggest takeaway. Every bill we pass, almost every bill we pass, has some fiscal impact. And we have to decide if we want that impact to the fiscal stability of our state matters enough to allow it to go across the General Assembly's floor. Our budget takes and highlights in several areas those bills as they passed and calls out the spending that was placed in to support the bills that we've passed previously. It's not saying that those bills were a bad idea. It's not saying that the spending's a bad idea. It's simply trying to call to point and remind us that everything we do here has a cost and that someone else is normally paying the bill. The budget is laid out in areas. It starts with the judicial branch, as you know. It goes through most of the legislative branch next, and then it goes through the executive branch. Actually, it starts with the legislative branch, goes to the courts, and then goes to the executive branch. And I'm going to explain it and run through it that way too. When we get to the executive branch, it'll be alphabetical. It's not by how we favoritize different agencies. It's just alphabetical. So I'm going to run through it starting now and give you a little idea of what's up. You can see the legislative budget. There's not a whole lot of ads there, mostly for legislative services, very low dollars, and you can read through those. At the courts, you're going to see a few more increases. The Senate's proposal begins all positions and all raises on January 1st. It eliminates some laudable but not yet started initiatives. And it takes and acknowledges the retention needs in the prosecuting attorney's council. But it also takes the start of those retention programs to January 1st. We also remain true to the formulas, as I mentioned already, for public defenders and prosecuting attorneys, and that formula funds one prosecuting attorney and one public defender per Superior Court judges and circuits. It also funds a chief ADA and of course the DA. One of the more proud items that I have is actually the juvenile courts. You know, for the past 2 or 3 years, we've worked with them on a program to try to get some data to help us understand our foster care program and ending termination of parental rights when we needed those children to be able to be adopted in a more expedient fashion. The juvenile courts have worked with us well. We asked for data. Our Senate budget analyst, Jennifer, made this one of her top priorities. I was going to call it a pet project, but it's really more a top priority. And because we got responses from every single juvenile court, we have not recommended a reduction in the juvenile court grants this year. Moving to the first executive department, which will be Ag. We acknowledge that there's significant concerns with our state's poultry industry, and we tried to fund the concerns there. There was a request for planning for future lab. We took the House's proposal, studied it in detail. We want to support that initiative as well, but we want to study it a little bit further. So instead of putting the planning and design money in, we've included money instead for planning to make sure we understand exactly what's going to happen with both the Capitol Hill complex and with the state lab needed for agriculture. We support it. I want to make sure we just understand that plan first. We did continue to fund the plans, though, that relate to the Capitol Hill and for state farmers market changes. We had an interesting proposal concerning feral hogs. That's a huge problem for Ag. My analysts are laughing because we brought it up. They thought this up. You know, the proposal brought to us was pens. Those pens cost about $14,000 each. And you know how pens work with feral hogs if you live anywhere outside the metro region. The proposal was relatively expensive, about $500,000. What we came up with our subcommittee chairs and others was perhaps a different type of program that would basically incentivize hunters in these areas to create a program to go after that for 1/5 of the cost. So again, something that I'm glad we were able to think up. We want to solve that problem, and hopefully we can solve it with less state dollars being used. At the Department of Behavioral Health, we have focused our state resources here for many, many years. You've seen a 25% increase, I believe, in the past 5 years on spending on mental health resources in our state. The Senate's budget increases the now comp waivers by 200, and then it annualizes the funding for another 100 comp waivers. It provides funding for the Macon Stabilization Center. We fund 1/4 of the Fulton Behavioral Crisis Center, 1/4 because it's believed to be starting up in spring of next year. That's not a slight to them at all. It's just we don't need to fund that startup cost if we only think it's going to make it through 1/4 of the fiscal year. And we continue to focus on forensic beds. We know we have a backlog there. We want to work through that before it becomes more of a crisis situation. The Senate's budget eliminated a contract with a vendor who left state medical providers holding the bag for about $2.7 million. We also receded on funding for certain other initiatives that may have been started, and we think they're good ideas, but at this point in time may need a little bit further analysis. We held the House number for the increases in the Georgia Housing Voucher Program, and we continued the Senate's priority for autism treatment, care, and support. In the DBHDD budget, we did say no to many worthy endeavors, but we're not no forever on those endeavors. We just want to make sure that we continue to study those and see how the fiscal health of the state continues over the next few years. In the Department of Community Affairs, there were areas where providers were unable to provide some receipts for previous expenditures, and so we zeroed out the future funding for those measures. We supported the City of Albany's efforts to continue to support its history and support childhood learning in its plan for its revitalization downtown. We supported the plans of the House and the Governor to reduce the number of programs that are in the Department of Community Affairs and to consolidate others for better resource provisions to our citizens. We also reduced the funds at 2 of our largest state economic development programs, being One Georgia and REBA. Those had been plussed up over the years by different legislative ads. since we're now at a point that we need to begin reassessing our spending ourselves, we pulled some of those legislative adds to return those back to base number figures. At the Department of Community Health, we did support the House increase on provider rates for primary care and dental care codes, but we did it at half the amount that the House had added. We supported the ABA therapy rate increase at 3%, and we supported the full increase for neonatologist and maternal fetal medicine rate increases. We did not support the rate increases for ventilators, speech, or durable medical equipment. At EMS, we supported a 5% rate increase for 7 EMS codes, and we funded the increase to begin transportation reimbursement at mile 6. The Board of Dentistry, interesting things that we came into as we dove into that matter. There's some new leadership over there, and we actually have some concerns related to safety at the department, the Board of Dentistry, and we are going to address those with funding slightly less than the House's level, but we are going to have to provide some things, including protective equipment, security equipment at the Board of Dentistry. The Senate's budget also funds 2 additional federally qualified health centers, and we support sickle cell research at an amount lesser than the House did, but we recognize over $28 million in base spending on sickle cell health and resources to support the treatment of this disease. The Senate supports $1 million addition for PTSD and wraparound services related to Georgia's veterans and supporting their families. We continued the governor's, the House, and the Senate's practice of moving skilled nursing facilities forward on their audited cost reports. And I think that's something that we're very proud that we've been able to do for the past few years, and it's important that we continue to do that so that that number does not become insurmountable in future years. For pharmacy matters, the Senate agreed with the House and held $3.1 million to support our independent pharmacies in the state health benefit plan. We also added an additional $5 million by moving about $3.5 million out of USG over to DCH, combining it with $1.2 million that the House had already added for a $5 million reimbursement for drugs dispensed to persons for self-administration in an amount equal to the national average drug acquisition cost that most people refer to as the NADAC. The Senate's budget includes and supports 150 new residency spots, and it instructs the Department of Community Health to file a state plan amendment for the use of Medicaid reimbursements to maximize Georgia dollars in graduate medical education, similar to what's being done in the state of Florida. And we understand when Florida filed for their state plan amendment, that was approved very quickly in about 60 days. The Department of Corrections. Remember that we met on the Department of Corrections and their budget before the governor ever gave us his proposal this year. And that was with his help. He gave us the Department of Corrections numbers early. Commissioner Oliver has been very transparent to let us know that he has an issue with staff and retention there and needs some significant resources to even manage the locks. Our body has also been focused on technology related to contraband entering the facilities, and we've been focused on banning contraband and making sure that cell phones did not work inside those facilities. The governor's budget had an increase of roughly $125 million in base budget items for the Department of Corrections. The House's proposal carried that number up to roughly $250 million over the base number for corrections, and the Senate's number falls somewhere in between. We didn't take all of the House ads. We're slightly higher than the governor, and we end up with roughly $170 million in additional base funding for the Department of Corrections to address retention, to address staffing, to address security related to locks and gates, and to address technology moving forward in the future. At the Department of Driver Services, the Senate acknowledged the use of technology by the department and supported that use by requesting evidence that that use has allowed them to reduce their need for additional personnel in the future. At at DCAL, the Department of Early Child Learning, We support the governor and House's recommendation for 500 additional CAPS-funded slots. Remember, we've now maxed out the federal funds in CAPS, so we're completely on state funds for this measure, and we serve about 50,000 children statewide through that program. We continue to fund our pre-K programs, and we agree with the House and the governor for $14 million to continue the phased-in reduction of class sizes from 20 to 22. At the Department of Economic Development, we recognize base funding instead of increasing funds at the Martin Luther King Center. We have base funds there, I believe, of it's $250,000 or $500,000. It's written on the line. I apologize. I don't remember it right now. And we delayed support for Super Bowl 62 and the 2031 NCAA Final Four for the same reasons that we stated in the amended budget. One event's 3 years away, one event's 6 years away. We do support those programs and want to make sure that we provide the necessary security there. I want some more explanation about the infrastructure requested. But again, if we're going to fund those programs, we believe the state should keep the interest on those dollars rather than paying those out and allowing those dollars to be, the interest to be kept at other entities. In the Department of Education, we continue to fully fund the QBE teaching formula. We did reduce funding again for testing and asked that those numbers could be trued up in the amended budget if more PSAT or other AP tests are given. And we took reductions based on utilization in various different categories. We increased funds for character education, and we funded a Senate bill that passed last year concerning school supplies, but did it at a different figure than had previously been discussed with the House. The House half funded the measure. We believe that the best way to engage communities in their schools is to have seed funding from the state that would fund this program at a 25% level and allow for matching funds either from the local, the LEA, the local education agency, or from civic organizations in the same community. In literacy, this has been an initiative of the Senator from the 4th and really the Senate as a whole for many years, and we appreciate Speaker Burns and Ms. Dell Burns and their focus on this area too. We've probably made so much progress because of their involvement. I'm not sure we would have been nearly as far down this road had the Senator from the 4th and the Speaker and Ms. Dell not been so focused. There's someone else who deserves a lot of credit for that, and that's another one of our Senate budget analysts, Lindsay, who made this one of her top priorities to tackle. The Senate's budget agrees with all of the House dollars added in literacy. We do not change a single dollar. We do not reduce a single dollar. We do not true up a single dollar. We agree and support the House's adds as it relates to literacy fully. In student services, we did have some differences though. There was a House initiative related to student mental health. The Senate's not yet ready, based on bills that are currently pending here, to fund a database program there. We zeroed that out, but it's not. We also zeroed out some funding that you'll see in student services related to mental health, but it's not a zero as a whole. What you will actually see is we took that funding, we combined part of it with the program funding we already have for school mental-based health services in the APEX program, moved those out of DBHD and moved them all over to the school security program, because we do think that mental health is part of school security. We chose not to support the $28 million House targeted ad for economically disadvantaged support programs, and choosing instead to recognize the over $1.5 billion in base funding support for this effort. We did support and increased funds for about $12.5 million total for out-of-school care. And in the Senate's biggest budget move, we fully supported and fully funded the Promise Scholarship at 1% of QBE, which is $141 million. This will allow for 21,000 students and their families to have options to pick other schools when the school that they're attending falls in the bottom quartile of schools otherwise in the state. At employees' retirement systems, the House had a line for about $23 million for state employees and state retirees rather, and payments to them. There's been a lot of discussion, I know, about COLAs in this building for a while. The Senate committee increased this amount to almost $76 million for annual payments to state retirees to help with record high inflation that they've experienced over the past half decade and to improve the funded ratio, which is necessary if they're ever going to be able to restart that COLA program again. At the Department of Human Services, I really want to highlight an efficiency here. For many, many years, we had added monies, millions of dollars, year over year to a contract that we had with a Georgia-based company to verify labor and wage data. Last year, we had an employee in the Department of Human Services come to us and say, I think we can do this better. This contract continues to increase. I think I can write a program that would allow us to simply bid out to a lowest cost, essentially like a reverse auction, to verify labor and wage data. Because of the success of that program and the reduction in federal fines that we were assessed when that previous company got it wrong, we're going to be able to reduce the Department of Human Services budget by a little over $2 million. At GBI, you'll see that the state will continue to fund the Macon improvements. We will continue to fund lab equipment, and based on an innovative approach by the subcommittee chair over that area, we're going to purchase 5 portable mass spectrometers to assist in getting quicker results for ADAs and other departments related to proving that certain drugs are the drugs they said they were, which we believe will help us also move faster and get more efficiencies in our criminal justice system. The Senate budget also includes $100,000 for the cold case unit. It's a reduction from the House, but it's an increase to the base funding. At CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, we did not replace the loss of federal funds, but we did acknowledge anticipated federal funds for core services for victims of crimes, which allows us to pull back on some of the increases you may have seen in the House budget for state funding there. We're going to promote efficiencies in this item as well, in this agency. We believe that the 24-hour human trafficking hotline can be done with resources at the GSAC, which would allow us to continue that 24/7 hotline without needing to increase additional state funds. At the Department of Juvenile Justice, we're really proud of the commissioner and the work she's done here. We want to support her work, and we'll fund a 4% salary increase almost across the board in that agency, with 8% increases in certain fields that we see the potential for a lot higher turnover. At the Department of Labor, we paused some spending there just to give the commissioner time to prepare her plan moving forward. At the Department of Law, we pulled back slightly on the number of positions, but remained supportive of the gang prosecution units and expansion of human trafficking units into Augusta and into Macon. We transferred $50,000 out of the Department of Law over to the Judicial Council based on testimony by the Judicial Council that the Department of Law may not have been able to represent them based on conflicts with the branches of government. At the Department of Natural Resources, we left $1 million for beach restoration, pulled the remaining $3 million. We funded $349,000 for a matter related to offshore reef fishing and complications there with federal surveys that are really beginning to impact commercial fishing and tourism in that area. At the Environmental Protection Division, we streamlined the contracting process and allowed the state to save another $581,000 there. We pulled back increases for the venison processing and chronic waste disease programs. We think both are important, but they have base funding, and we recognize that base funding in both of those items. At the Department of Public Health, we removed funds and eliminated the Georgia Coordinating Council. That was roughly $3 million. Remember, it was something we stood up during COVID. We've now pulled out the base funds and ended that program. We transferred duties that may have been assigned to that council elsewhere, and we took the opportunity to help reduce cost in the future by funding something related to viral hepatitis. If we can catch and treat that disease early, the cost savings is immense. If we do not catch that disease early, then you're obviously likely looking at a liver transplant, and many of those liver transplants end up being funded through our Medicaid program. We want to catch that early and see if we can prevent those costs in the future. At the Department of Public Safety, we continue to be careful on additional staff, and we recognize payments from the chiefs of police and sheriffs in the amended budget rather than adding them to base budgets, and we're committed to continuing that for transparency purposes in the future. We supported the retention plan at the Public Service Commission, and in the Board of Regents budget, we reduced funds for the Georgia Cyber Center to continue to allow it to stand on its own as it was designed to do so with rent proceeds. We did not support the addition of the micro grants program, but we did support the technology research additions into the peanut industry. We kept the House cut to the public law schools, but we returned the base funding for the legal clinics also at those law schools. And we decreased base funding in various programs that had been begun in previous cycles, past cycles by the General Assembly, and as time's gone on, we've wondered if those still needed to be continued, and we reduced several of them. We reduced expenditures to projections for the Forest Land Protections Grant Program at the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue still believes it's going to be completely fine for funding this program. Just you've seen in the past that the grants have decreased, less qualified, less counties qualified or qualified at lesser amounts, so we pulled back some base funding there. At the Secretary of State's office, we did provide $600,000 to fund the State Elections Board, and we added language to certain boards that are attached to the Secretary of State related to their rent to help encourage them and push them forward on seeking rent at reduced rates. In the Department of Transportation, we continued utilization of the motor fuel for most construction and maintenance matters, and we held the House addition for airport aid. We also had one request that we did fund $2 million requested by members of this body for transportation improvements at the Cumberland CID area. In veterans, we added $3.5 million on various veterans-related care items, and we're extremely excited about the subacute care unit coming online very soon. In capital projects, usually what we would see on state bonds, we did not fund those with bonds. We funded those with cash, moving closer to the governor's proposal on capital projects. We disagreed with the House on that bond plan overall, and again, I told you opting instead to fund these with cash, and we also delayed some capital projects for savings that we thought would be better funded elsewhere. That one of those capital projects was at Ag, another one was at the Department of Juvenile Justice. When you flip through the budget, you know the capital projects are at the end. You're not going to see very many ads for the House or the Senate, and I think that's something that the legislature overall needs to become more accustomed to. As you see that 1%, 1.8% growth line in the future, and you've seen and we've talked about the additions that you're going to need for corrections. The monies we put there this year are annualized now, but they're probably looking at additional annualized funds in the future. I think you're going to see our capital expenditures continue to get smaller. Of those ads, one of them that you will see is an added funding for design at Augusta Tech, and we funded the UNG project with alternate fund sources. The Senate's budget did one thing slightly different this year that's only informational. Many times we hear comparisons of our state to others related to the state income tax, and that's fair. That's a very fair comparison. And the question you get from many constituents is, hey, why can Florida or Texas or Tennessee eliminate the state income tax and Georgia can't? Well, Georgia can. And if you look on the first page of your budget, after the green sheets, the Senate Budget Office helped me compile a list of tax credits and tax exemptions that we already pay for at our state. And if you add those up, that is more than we collect in our state income tax. I'm not suggesting as a policy that we should eliminate all these, but I am telling you, every time we pass another one, we make it harder to eliminate the state income tax. Further, if you look at some of these items, they're big, big numbers. The first one is $12.2 billion. For purposes of understanding only, please know that we collect roughly $16 billion total in individual income tax. So sales and use is tax exemptions. We do not tax services. That's a policy decision of our state, and I'm not suggesting we move otherwise. But think about it. We don't tax it when the plumber comes to your house, when the person's fixing your car, when the person's building your house. You don't get a sales tax bill for their labor. In Texas, you do, 6.25%. If Georgia wants to move in that direction instead, we can eliminate our state income tax, but we're going to have to look at how Texas makes that up. And I wanted to provide for you this graph to show you exemptions that Georgia has that certain ones of our other states, maybe surrounding states, maybe do not. The total of that list there well eclipses the amount of monies that we bring in state income tax. So that's just there for information purposes in case we want to continue this discussion and move it forward later on. In closing, I need to tell you thank you so much. This is the 6th year you've allowed me to chair the budget on your behalf. 11th budget that you've allowed me to help write for our state. And it is truly an honor. It never gets easier. But because of your input, your involvement, and your constant support, it's a bearable task. And the Senate Budget Office staff are incredibly adept at helping answer your questions and help you do the best job you can to represent your districts individually and then our state and its fiscal health overall. So thank you for allowing me to do this again this year, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Senator Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to personally thank you for your support of the data project for the juvenile courts, and I'm very happy that the juvenile court clerks have responded. I understand there's still some issues with the some of the counties where the Superior Court clerks do the reporting, and I wondered if you could address that.
Yes, ma'am, there are. You're correct. We did get responses from every court. So some of those came in via jump drive. There is a portal that the General Assembly, your body, has already funded that allows for a digital submission of all that data. It's able to be submitted with redacted information so we don't have a scare of personal information getting out. The jump drives are not safe as that on that. So if there are any clerks listening, I hope you'll please take a look at the JCATS program that we are funding for you at the state level. We have had a small issue with Superior Court clerks being a little bit slower to update to the process, but we're, again, so thankful that the president of the Superior Court Clerks Council this year and the new management that you have at the Superior Court Clerks Council have been extremely willing to discuss that issue with us and move it forward. Yes, ma'am. The Dean of the Senate, Senator Harbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned something about cell phones at the Department of Corrections and the staffing issues. Are we looking at ways to get that up? Because as we heard in the committee hearings, it's pretty dire. They want to get up, and it's a safety issue for the law enforcement people there and that kind of thing. And secondly, how have we determined, is there any legal way we can ban the cell phones, or is that legal, or how does that work? Because we've heard that before, that you couldn't do it, so.
Right. We are working on that with our federal partners. We are not allowed to completely jam everything in that area, which I think is what you and I would prefer to do, take care of the problem from the beginning. Chairman Albers has been instrumental in going through every, not just line item, but every invoice related to those items you discussed, and without his help, I'm not sure that we could have finished this part of the budget in as expedited a fashion that we did.
Well, I certainly hope we can keep looking at that, because I just got the impression that that's a real serious problem that we need to look at. And thank you for the 28 million by sickle cell. I just always look at that.
In-base funding, right?
Okay, all right. Thank
It's
you,
in-base
sir.
funding. Note a majority of that is in Medicaid care. As Chairman Hardison brought up, I want this body to remember, you're going to be required to put additional dollars into corrections next year. So be thinking about that as you move forward and think about your request as you're back in your district after session. Chairman Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a comment. The last few years I've been able to be a subcommittee chair, and I just want to thank you for all your hard work and your staff. Caroline Hicks did a great job as my analyst. Your analysts are really good, and your team's very good, and I just want to say thank you. And it's been an honor to serve as one of your subcommittee chairs, and I know we all had to take tough cuts. I mean, I was talking to the senator from the 56. I had to take tough cuts in economic development. I don't think there's a department that didn't have to take a little bit of a haircut, but you did it in the right way, and I just want to say thank you. You've done a great job.
Well, thank you. Any credit for the staff, though, doesn't need to go to me. It needs to go to Austin and to Brent. They do the hiring and management, and I'll tell you, those analysts also, I say those analysts, they're sitting right there, they are so independent. And their ability to grasp onto an issue and move forward, you can't teach that. They're just an extremely impressive group. Chairman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo what Senator Beach is saying. I had the opportunity to sit with you several hours through this process, and I have in years past, thankfully, been able to be part of the process, and I'm consistently impressed with your knowledge of the budget and your wisdom and your compassion and your thoughtfulness in the way you approach this, and your willingness to take input from all the senators and try to do your best to address their priorities. And I just can't thank you enough. And again, your staff's just really, really incredible and super helpful. I appreciate you highlighting in your overview line 100.4, which deals with drug dispensing costs. We're adding $5 million. This issue of fairness with independent pharmacies versus chain pharmacies and PBMs is something the Senate has grappled with for years. It's a priority of the Lieutenant Governor and a priority of the Senate to get this right. We've got a bill on the floor today, House Bill 196, that we need to pass clean, that is going to, I think, fairly address this issue. I wanted to point out to the members that the $5 million is, a lot of that is initial cost in setting up this program. We do anticipate some funding, some savings in the future because this will put a ceiling on we're using the NADAC pricing formula, and we think we're going to have some savings because we're putting a ceiling on the cost of prescription drugs. So we'll have a floor and a ceiling, and it will restore fairness for our independent pharmacies. And I thank you for your leadership on this.
And thank you, Chairman Walker. You're right. That $5 million is only $1.2 million additional state funds. We pulled $3.8 million out of the USG program of savings we expect we'll have in pharmacies there. I tell you, all these kind words, I checked my pulse for a second. I didn't know if I was at my eulogy or not. If Senator Williams walks in here in a second, I'm going to get scared. Chairman Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to add to the compliments specifically around the not taking a bond package out. In a time where we've got extraordinary reserves that are undesignated, as well as our rainy day fund, the great budgeting that's happened from the governor, the Senate, and the House, I want to applaud you and the committee's work on saying we're not going to take out bonds when we have this type of funds available and being good fiscal conservatives. I think it's a great posture as we continue to demonstrate to other states what can be done while they're reeling with record deficits. So, well done.
Whip Robertson.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to say I'm glad you were able to absorb all those compliments and the good words, and we'll try to get it back on track if we can. I did see in here where there's I think it's a little less than $1 million appropriation for a new tower and equipment associated with that for, I believe is it Georgia Public Broadcasting that's in there?
It's in the bond package, yes, sir.
It's in the bond package, right?
Well,
and
it's not the bond package, the capital projects that normally would be bonds that we're funding with cash, correct?
Yes, sir. Can I ask you again, what's the overall investment we're making into Georgia Broadcasting in this budget?
Oh, man, why'd you ask me that one?
Because you were loving all the love so much.
You'd have to go to the Board of Regents.
Yes, sir.
In Board of Regents budget, you'd go to public broadcasting. Let's see here. It's not going to be on mine. Let's see here. I need to get one of my analysts. Hang on one second.
Yeah, I can go to the next question while they're looking if you need me to.
No, right before
Yes.
the Department of Revenue. Sorry. Let me go to my line on that, 307. I'm on 301. I hadn't gone quite far enough yet. My mortality is showing. $13.2 million.
Thank you. And the QBE fully funded, first of all, I want to thank you for that. And is any of that, did the study committee change any of that formula up to this point, or are we continuing to work under the way we have in years past?
Yeah, we've not changed anything with that formula. We did change things related to the non-QB formulas.
Yes, sir. Well, and finally, very uncharacteristically, I want to thank you so much for all the work you've done with the Georgia Department of Corrections. I understand that even though it doesn't seem like that, we're working with limited funding to take care of something that I think has been neglected for many years, and I appreciate how aggressive and how forthright you've been throughout this process to make sure those problems could be solved. And while I appreciate the 4%, I do look forward in years forward that we can continue to increase the environment that our state employees work in our prisons, and also increase the pay and benefits that they receive for doing a job that 99% of Georgians would never want to do. And thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you again, and you and Chairman Albers for what you did in the off session to help set this up. Again, I think we have a mission that we have to make sure we're promoting the safety of our employees, of those who are in our custody, and also the public at large. Chairman Advocate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job. I move for previous question on House Bill 68.
There's been a motion. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And it passes unanimously. Thank you so much. We stand adjourned.